Hi friends, this is Ray from Honey Top Bees. So why can't we feed sugar water when it's less than 50 degrees to our bees? Let's talk about it today. All right, so I know someone's going to put in the comments right away, we can't feed our bees sugar water because the sugar water is frozen solid. And I get it. Now, I raise bees in South Carolina now, but I have previously raised bees in Vermont, and we would never even consider the question about feeding bees sugar water during the winter months because it rarely got warm enough to unfreeze any liquid that was out in the yard. So it wasn't really a question. So I understand what some of you are going to say. Yeah, well, there's no chance that I could feed sugar water to my bees, but no matter where you live, whether it's in the South now or whether it's early spring in northern states, there's going to be times that the temperature is between 30 and 50 or 55 degrees, between frozen and 50, like I like to call it. And during those temperatures, it's not best to feed our bees sugar water. And so I thought we'd talk a little bit and kind of do a deep dive as to why we don't feed sugar water to our bees generally during those temperatures. And this was kind of spurred by a question that somebody recently asked me. They said, I know everybody says we can't feed sugar water to our bees when it's cold outside, but no one ever tells me why. So what's the reason why? So I had kind of forgotten about why we don't feed sugar water to bees less than 50 when someone asked me the question. I'd studied this in my master beekeeping course that I'm in through the University of Florida, but had forgotten the reasons why. So I kind of went back, did some research, and thought I would kind of share that with you as a refresher course if you are interested today in learning a little bit more about this subject. All right, reason number one. Reason number one is probably a pretty obvious reason. Stay around to the end of the video because the last reason is probably the main reason. But reason number one is this. In the cold, bees reduce their activity. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Bees are cold-blooded, and so they rely either on external temperatures in order to maintain their proper hive activity, or they rely on each other in the clustering activity. There's another video on my channel about how bees stay warm in the winter. You might want to check that one out if you want to understand how clustering works in the winter and how the bees are able to survive even very cold, frigid temperatures. Because the bees are clustering, they may not go and access the sugar water in another part of your hive, or maybe you put the sugar water. The bees may not be able to access it because they're not going to break cluster in order to go in to get it. Cluster together to conserve all of their heat and all of their energy, and so they're probably not likely to do anything that's going to cause them to leave their cluster in order to access the sugar water. So the other thing, I guess, in regard to bees and their activity is when it gets below 50 degrees, their metabolism slows significantly. It makes that much more difficult for them to process the sugar water. So if a bee ingests cold sugar water, that liquid can actually lower their internal temperature, causing a chilling effect, which is the exact opposite of what the bees are trying to do when they cluster together. And this can kind of slow down their whole digestive system, can cause the bee to become lethargic or unable to function, especially if they consume too much. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, why we don't feed sugar water to bees when the temperature is under 50 is the bees have a difficult time processing that sugar water. So as you know, when we feed sugar water to bees, what we're doing is we're creating a nectar-like substitute for the bees. And nectar has a water concentration anywhere between 65 and 85%. And the bees take that nectar and through a process of regurgitating it through their system, combining it with enzymes, through fanning it, through blowing bubbles in it, they reduce that thin nectar all the way down to a thick concentration that we know as honey now, which is around 18% moisture. So it's about a 50% or more moisture reduction in that sugar water. But during the winter time, it's very difficult for the bees to be able to evaporate all of that extra water off of that thin nectar-like substitute that we call sugar water. And so in cold temperatures, the evaporation process is much slower. The bees' activity is lower. Again, they may not be willing to break cluster in order to evaporate that. And so because that sugar water contains such a high concentration of water in it, the bees still have to process that. And so that's another reason why we don't. It's very difficult for them to process that water into something that they use and store, because in its regular form, they would typically reduce that down to a thicker substance like we know as sugar at around 18% moisture. But the third reason is probably the biggest reason, the main reason why we don't feed sugar water to bees in the winter, and that's reduced enzyme activity. So honeybees rely on enzymes to break down their food into usable forms, just like other creatures do as well. And these enzymes are most active in a normal temperature environment, so closer to their body temperature, which is about the same temperature that they keep their cluster at around 95 degrees or so. And so those enzymes are most active at their normal body temperature. But when they're in a cluster or working with a reduced body temperature because of external chill, those enzymes are not going to be as active. And so the bees use these enzymes to break down that sucrose, which is like that table sugar, that white granulated table sugar, into glucose and fructose, which is what they actually would use in order for their own storage of resources in the wintertime. Hey, I just wanted to invite you to like and subscribe to my channel as I try to build this channel up to the next 1,000 subscribers. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you very much. So the cold temperatures can hinder the activity of these enzymes, which will actually slow or halt the process of digestion. And when the process of digestion is hindered or slowed down, that leads to dysentery. And so that sugar water actually goes into the bee's crop stomach, which is kind of like their nectar storage stomach when they're transporting nectar, like from a flower to the hive. And when they're not able to process that properly, it can stay in that, and it can lead to dysentery with the bees. It can remain undigested in the bee's stomach, and this can create the risk also not only of dysentery but also of bloating within the bees because they cannot process that liquid water. So what do we do? Well, instead of feeding sugar water during that time, we usually change to several other things. If your hive is low on storage, then a lot of beekeepers will put a fondant. That's what I do. A fondant like the one I'm going to show you here. I'm talking about a fondant patty kind of like this. You can make your own fondant as well. There's recipes online and on YouTube where you can make your own fondant. But basically, it's more of a moist sugar, honey-like. It's thicker than honey, but it's a thicker consistency than just sugar water. But it's primarily sugar, and then they also add a lot of manufacturers add some additional nutrients into the fondant patty to increase its nutritional value to the bees. Or you can feed straight table sugar to the bees. This is sometimes called the mountain camp method, where you pour sugar water on some newspaper across the top of the frames or in a feeder shim above the bees, and then the bees can go up and can chew on that as another alternative way of feeding your bees over the course of the wintertime. These methods are much less risky for the bees than the sugar water because, again, you don't have the risk of chilling. You don't have the need for them to be able to process that sugar water and fan that sugar water down into a thicker substance before they would consume it. And so these are a lot less risky ways to be able to feed your bees over the course of the winter than sugar water. So yeah, this video is just a short little video. I just wanted to kind of review a little bit about why we don't feed sugar water to bees when it's cold out. As we get through the winter here, and whenever spring may break in your area of the country, a lot of beekeepers, including myself, as soon as that temperature starts to get a little bit warm, we start feeding sugar water as soon as we can to our bees in order to stimulate the queen to lay early spring, so that the hive is super strong, getting ready for the spring honey flow. We want to try to build up that hive. So what I do is I kind of keep an eye on the temperature in my area of the country. It's end of February, beginning of March. I will start feeding sugar water, either feeding it community feeding or feeding internally inside of the hives in order to build up that hive, in order to build up that population to get ready for the spring nectar.